In morphology and syntax, a clitic is a morpheme that has syntactic characteristics of a word, but depends phonologically on another word or phrase. In this sense, it is syntactically independent but phonologically dependent, always attached to a host. The term is derived from the Greek for leaning. It is pronounced like an affix, but plays a syntactic role at the phrase level. In other words, clitics have the form of affixes but the distribution of function words. For example, the contracted forms of the auxiliary verbs in I'm and we've are clitics. Clitics can belong to any grammatical category, although they are commonly pronouns, determiners, or adpositions. Note that orthography is not always a good guide for distinguishing clitics from affixes. Clitics may be written as separate words, but sometimes they are joined to the word on which they depend, or separated by special characters such as hyphens or apostrophes. The word clitic is often used loosely for what may be better described as an affix or word. Classification. Clitics fall into various categories depending on the position in relation to the word to which they are connected. Proclitic. A proclitic appears before its host. It is common in Romance languages. For example, in French, there is il se révèle or je t'aime. Enclitic. An enclitic appears after its host. Latin, senatus populus Romanus. Senate, people, and Roman equals the Senate and people of Rome. Ancient Greek, anthropoi theoete, people, gods, and equals men and gods. Sanskrit, naro gajaska equals and gt, with sandi, the man, the elephant, and equals the man and the elephant. Sanskrit, namaste and lt, nama plus te, with sandi change nama and gt, namas. Bowing to you, Czech, chcesly. Want if equals if you want. Mesoclitic. A mesoclitic appears between the stem of the host and other affixes. For example, in Portuguese, conquista it will be conquered. Aloe, I will give it. Martiriawa, he, she, it would kill her. These are found much more often in writing than in speech. It is even possible to use two pronouns inside the verb, as in Danolo, he, she, it will give it to us. Or date I will give it her, you, as in other Romance languages. The Portuguese synthetic future tense comes from the merging of the infinitive and the corresponding finite forms of the verb haver, which explains the possibility of separating it from the infinitive. Endoclitic. The endoclitic splits apart the root and is inserted between the two pieces. Endoclitics defy the lexical integrity hypothesis and were long claimed to be impossible. However, evidence from the Udi language suggests that they exist. Endoclitics are also found in Pashto and are reported to exist in Degama. Distinction. One important distinction divides the broad term clitics into two categories: simple clitics and special clitics. This distinction is, however, disputed. Simple clitics are free morphemes, meaning they can stand alone in a phrase or sentence. They are unaccented and thus phonologically dependent upon a nearby word. They only derive meaning from this host. Special clitics are morphemes that are bound to the word they are dependent upon, meaning they exist as a part of the host. This form, which is unaccented, represents a variant of a free form that does carry stress. While the two variants carry similar meaning and phonological makeup, the special clitic is bound to a host word and unaccented. Properties. Some clitics can be understood as elements undergoing a historical process of grammaticalization. Lexical item. Clitic affix. According to this model from Judith Clevens, an autonomous lexical item in a particular context loses the properties of a fully independent word over time and acquires the properties of a morphological affix. At any intermediate stage of this evolutionary process, the element in question can be described as a clitic. As a result, this term ends up being applied to a highly heterogeneous class of elements, presenting different combinations of word-like and affix-like properties. Prosody. One characteristic shared by many clitics is a lack of prosodic independence. A clitic attaches to an adjacent word, known as its host. Orthographic conventions treat clitics in different ways. Some are written as separate words, some are written as one word with the hosts, and some are attached to the hosts, but set off by punctuation. Comparison with affixes. Although the term clitic can be used descriptively to refer to any element whose grammatical status is somewhere in between a typical word and a typical affix, linguists have proposed various definitions of clitic as a technical term. One common approach is to treat clitics as words that are prosodically deficient. They cannot appear without a host, and they can only form an accentual unit in combination with the host. The term post-lexical clitic is used for this narrower sense of the term. Given this basic definition, further criteria are needed to establish a dividing line between post-lexical clitics and morphological affixes, since both are characterized by a lack of prosodic autonomy. There is no natural, clear-cut boundary between the two categories. However, by identifying clusters of observable properties that are associated with core examples of clitics on the one hand, and core examples of affixes on the other, one can pick out a battery of tests that provide an empirical foundation for a clitic-affix distinction. An affix syntactically and phonologically attaches to a base morpheme of a limited part of speech, such as a verb, to form a new word. A clitic syntactically functions above the word level, on the phrase or clause level, and attaches only phonetically to the first, last, or only word in the phrase or clause, whichever part of speech the word belongs to. The results of applying these criteria sometimes reveal that elements that have traditionally been called clitics actually have the status of affixes. Zwicky and Pullum postulated 5 characteristics that distinguish clitics from affixes. Clitics do not select the hosts. That is, they are promiscuous, attaching to whichever word happens to be in the right place. Affixes deselect the host. They only attach to the word they are connected to semantically, and generally attach to a particular part of speech. Clitics do not exhibit arbitrary gaps. Affixes, on the other hand, are often lexicalized and may simply not occur with certain words. Clitics do not exhibit morphophonological idiosyncrasies. That is, they follow the morphophonological rules of the rest of the language. Affixes may be irregular in this regard. Clitics do not exhibit semantic idiosyncrasies. That is, the meaning of the phrase plus clitic is predictable from the meanings of the phrase and the clitic. Affixes may have irregular meanings. Clitics can attach to material already containing clitics. Affixes can attach to other affixes but not to material containing clitics. Comparison with words similar to the discussion above. Clitics must be able to be distinguished from words. There have been a number of linguistic tests proposed to differentiate between the two categories. Some tests specifically are based upon the understanding that when comparing the two, clitics resemble affixes, while words resemble syntactic phrases. Clitics and words resemble different categories in the sense that they share certain properties with them. 6 such tests are described below. These, of course, are not the only ways to differentiate between words and clitics. If a morpheme is bound to a word and can never occur in complete isolation, then it is likely a clitic. In contrast, a word is not bound and can appear on its own. If the addition of a morpheme to a word prevents further affixation, then it is likely a clitic. If a morpheme combines with single words to convey a further degree of meaning, then it is likely a clitic. A word will combine with a group of words or phrases to denote further meaning. If a morpheme is required to be in a certain order with respect to other morphemes within the construction, then it is likely a clitic. Independent words enjoy free ordering with respect to other words within the confines of the word order of the language. If a morpheme's allowable behavior is determined by one principle, it is likely an clitic. For example, a precedes indefinite nouns in English. Words can rarely be described with one such description. In general, words are more morphologically complex than clitics. Clitics are rarely composed of more than one morpheme. Word order. Clitics do not always appear next to the word or phrase that they are associated with grammatically. They may be subject to global word order constraints that act on the entire sentence. Many Indo-European languages, for example, obey Wackernagle's law, which requires clitics to appear in second position, after the first syntactic phrase of the first stressed word in a clause. Latin had three enclitics that appeared in second or third position of a clause, annum, indeed, for autumn, but, moreover, vero, however. For example, qui enim potest negere. Spivak reports that in her corpus of Caesar, Cicero and Sallust these three words appear in such position in 100% of the cases. Indo-European languages. Germanic languages, English and Clitics include the contracted versions of auxiliary verbs, as in I'm and we. Some also regard the possessive marker, as in the Queen of England's crown, as an enclitic, rather than a genitival inflection. The negative marker nt is incadent, etc. is often thought to be a clitic developed from the lexical item not. Linguists Arnold's Wiki and Geoffrey Pullum argue, however, that the form has the properties of an affix rather than a syntactically independent clitic. Other Germanic languages. Old Norse. The definite article was the enclitic in itt, as in Alfrin, the Elfgorfen, the gift, and treeqtit, the tree, an abbreviated form of the independent pronoun hin, cognate of the German pronoun gender. It was fully declined for gender, case and number. Since both the noun and enclitic were declined, this led to double declension. The situation remains similar in modern Faroese and Icelandic, but in Danish, Norwegian and Swedish the enclitics have become endings. Dutch, t definite article of neuter nouns and third-person singular neuter pronoun, k first-person pronoun, j second-person singular pronoun, i.e. third-person masculine singular pronoun, ze third-person plural pronoun, plowed deed von dog, will he do it today? Gothic. Sentence clitics appear in second position in accordance with Wackernagle's law, including and than, then, anything. For example, abu thus ilben of thyself. Multiple clitics can be stacked up, and will split a preverb from the rest of the verb if the preverb comes at the beginning of the clause, e.g. than satijos, and then he seized them, gar shai, whether he saw anything. Romance languages. In the Romance languages, the object personal pronoun forms are sometimes claimed to be clitics, others claim that they are actually affixes, as they only attach to the verb they are the object of. There is no general agreement on the issue. In Spanish, for example, lo atomos, damelo. Colloquial European Portuguese allows object suffixes before the conditional and future suffixes of the verbs ela lava lo Iowa, ela está no lo ao. Colloquial Portuguese of Brazil and Portugal and Spanish of the former Gran Colombia allow ser to be conjugated as a verbal clitic adverbial adjunct to emphasize the importance of the phrase compared to its context with the meaning of really or in truth. Ele estava era gordo. Ele ligou acute para Paula. Note that this clitic form is only for the verb ser and is restricted to only third-person singular conjugations. It is not used as a verb in the grammar of the sentence but introduces prepositional phrases and adds emphasis. It does not need to concord with the tense of the main verb, as in the second example, and can be usually removed from the sentence without affecting the simple meaning. Proto-Indo-European. In the Indo-European languages, some clitics can be traced back to Proto-Indo-European. For example, *ke is the original form of Sanskrit, Greek tau epsilon, and Latin k, Latin k, and ve, or kni, Greek tau epsilon, and delta epsilon, but gamma alpha rho for omicron nu. Therefore, Slavic languages, Russian, not Czech, special clitics, weak personal and reflexive pronouns, certain auxiliary verbs, and various short particles and adverbs. Nepadari lo by shami mutadat. I would not succeed in giving it to him. In addition, there are various simple clitics including short prepositions. Polish by si, no, ms, smy, si, me, ci, go, mu and amp, c. Other languages. Hungarian. The marker of indirect questions is e, nem tudja emi acute g, John E. He doesn't know yet if he'll come. Quote, this clitic can also mark direct questions with the falling intonation. Is and she also function as clitics. Although written separately, they are pronounced together with the preceding word, without stress. Is John. He'll come too. Sem John. He won't come either. Quote. Japanese. All particles, such as the genitive postposition and the topic marker. Korean. The copular and the adjectival, as well as some nominal and verbal particles. However, alternative analysis suggests that the nominal particles do not function as clitics, but as phrasal affixes. Arabic. Suffixes standing for direct object pronouns and, or indirect object pronouns are suffixed to verbs. Possessive determiners are suffixed to nouns, and pronouns are suffixed to particles. Ganda are attached to a verb to form the progressive wo. In Somali, pronominal clitics, either subject or object clitics, are required in Somali. These exist as simple clitics postponed to the noun they apply to. Lexical arguments can be omitted from sentences, but pronominal clitics cannot be.